You were 7 years old when you first realized your parent needed you more than you needed them. Not in the way parents are supposed to need their children, for love, for connection, for joy. You were needed to manage their emotions, to keep them stable, to make sure they didn't fall apart. You didn't know it had a name back then. You just knew that when your mom was upset, you had to be the calm one. When your dad came home stressed, you had to make everything okay. You learned to read the room before you learned to read chapter books. You learned to regulate their feelings before you understood your own. This isn't a story about bad parents. This is about something more complicated than that. If you spent your childhood parenting your own parents, if you were the emotional support system for the people who were supposed to support you, this video is going to name something you've carried your whole life without knowing what to call it. Here's what actually happened to you. Psychologists call this parentification or emotional parentification. It's when a child becomes the caregiver, not physically necessarily, but emotionally. You weren't changing diapers or paying bills, you were managing feelings, absorbing anxiety, keeping the peace, making yourself smaller so the adults in your life could feel bigger. Dr. Lisa M. Hooper, who researches parentification extensively, describes it this way. The child becomes the parent's confidant, therapist, or emotional regulator, roles they're developmentally unprepared to handle. And because it feels like love, they don't recognize it as a burden until decades later. You weren't chosen because you were strong. You were chosen because you were there, and because you didn't know you could say no. So you learned to put your own needs last. You learned that your feelings were too much, too heavy, too complicated for anyone else to handle. You learned that love meant taking care of someone else's emotional world while quietly dismantling your own. And now you're an adult who struggles to ask for help, who feels guilty for having needs, who can't stop managing everyone else's emotions even when it's killing you. Because when you're 7 years old and your parent needs you to be their therapist, you don't learn how to be a child. You learn how to disappear. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in your life as an adult. Because parentification doesn't end when you leave home. It rewires how you show up in every relationship for the rest of your life. Tuesday morning, your friend calls upset about something at work, and you're immediately in fix-it mode, asking the right questions, offering solutions, managing their emotional state. And when you hang up, you realize you never mentioned the thing that's been stressing you out all week, because that's not your role. Your role is to hold space for everyone else. That's not friendship. That's a pattern you learned when you were too young to know it had a name. Thursday evening, you're at dinner with your partner and they mention feeling overwhelmed, and you watch yourself shift. Your body language changes, your voice softens, you start managing the situation, anticipating needs, making sure they're okay, and your own stress, the thing you were going to bring up, quietly gets filed away for later, because taking care of them feels more urgent than taking care of yourself. That's not love, that's parentification showing up in your adult relationships. But wait, because here's where this gets particularly important to understand. Research from the Journal of Family Psychology found that adults who were parentified as children show what's called compulsive caregiving. They can't not take care of others. It's not a choice, it's a survival mechanism that never got turned off. Dr. Amy Baker's research shows that parentified children grow into adults who struggle with what she calls over-responsibility disorder. You feel responsible for everyone's emotional state, even when it's not your job, even when it's costing you your own well-being. And here's what makes this exhausting. You're incredibly skilled at reading emotional cues. You can sense when someone's upset before they say a word. You know what people need before they ask, because you had to. Missing those signs as a child meant your parent might fall apart, and that felt like your fault. So you built this extraordinary emotional radar, and now you can't turn it off. You're constantly scanning every room, every relationship, every conversation for signs that someone needs you to manage their feelings. Dr. Gregory Yurkovich, who studied parentification for decades, calls this living in permanent caretaker mode. You're not relating to people, you're managing them. And the cost is that nobody ever learned to take care of you because you never learned how to let them. So you became the person everyone comes to, the therapist friend, the one who always has it together, the reliable one. And inside, you're drowning because you spent your whole childhood learning how to hold other people's emotional weight, and nobody ever taught you that you're allowed to put it down. So what does this mean for you now? First, you weren't responsible for your parents' emotional state. You were a child. Their feelings weren't your job to manage. You took that on because you had to survive. But you don't have to carry it anymore. Second, compulsive caregiving isn't kindness, it's a trauma response. When you can't say no to taking care of others, when you feel guilty for having your own needs, that's not generosity, that's parentification still running your life. Third, people can handle their own emotions. You're not abandoning them by letting them feel what they feel. You're not responsible for fixing everyone. That weight was never yours to carry. And here's what nobody tells you. The skill you built, reading people, sensing needs, holding space, that's real. That's valuable, but you're allowed to use it without sacrificing yourself. You're allowed to care without disappearing. If you had to parent your own parents, if you spent your childhood managing emotions you weren't old enough to understand, you're not broken. You survived by becoming what they needed. That's not a character flaw, that's adaptation. Watch our video on people who apologize for everything next. Same survival pattern. Subscribe for more psychology on childhood patterns nobody talks about, and comment, are you still the family therapist you were never supposed to be?